Trump, and this is a poorly produced Apush video focusing on historical period 1945 to 1980.
I've lived through this whole period, and I can tell you, it wasn't great. We're gonna make it great again.
I agree complete with that statement. This time period was filled with racial protests, war, and economic changes that shaped the country it is today. That is probably the smartest thing I've said in a long time.
The 7 presidents of this time were Truman, Eisenhower, Kennedy, Johnson, Nixon, Ford, and Carter. To elaborate on the key concepts, we're going to be going through each president and their terms to see what happened through the U.S. at the time that they were presidents.
I wish that I could be like the cool kids, 'cause all the cool kids, they seem to fit in. In the arms of the angel.
Shh, be very, very quiet. I'm hunting rabbits.
Hey baby, I hear the blues are calling, tossed salads and scrambled eggs. Mercy. And maybe I seem a bit confused. Yeah, maybe, but I got you pegged.
Hi. How are you?
While Truman became president, the Korean War was a thing that happened. The U.S. was involved due to the containment policy. Truman also dropped 2 atomic bombs on Japan, Little Boy and Fat Man. Truman also introduced the policy of containment due to the beginnings of the Cold War.
During Eisenhower's presidency, we saw a rise in moderate conservatives, which they would adopt more liberal ideas and they would continue deals like the New Deal from FDR's presidency. One of these things included the Social Security Act. He also enacted the Federal Aid Highway Act, which constructed over 41,000 miles of interstate. And before he left office in his farewell address, he also warned the nation about the military-industrial complex. In the Supreme Court, they ruled in Brown v. Board of Education that ruled separate but equal was unconstitutional and it overruled Plessy v. Ferguson.
As the first Roman Catholic president, Kennedy had Marilyn Monroe in the White House a lot, if you know what I mean. He also pushed for the space race to the moon. Alongside that, he proposed the Peace Corps, which were Americans helping out in third world countries. Kennedy also authorized the Bay of Pigs and took part in the Cuban Missile Crisis. We saw the March on Washington and many other protests of the Civil Rights Movement before he was assassinated in 1963.
The next president in line was Johnson. He was the president who enacted the Civil Rights Act of 1964. In that, there was a section on voting rights. In determining whether an individual is qualified under state law or laws to vote in any federal election, apply any standard, practice, or procedure different from the standards, practices, or procedures applied under such law or laws to other individuals within the same country, parish, or similar political subdivision who have been found by state officials to be qualified to vote. This expanded voting rights it expanded more rights to blacks from the amendments passed after the Civil War. Johnson also started his own Great Society in Congress, which was pretty much just a glorified New Deal that FDR had in World War II. During this time, there was also many civil rights. There was many protests like the Freedom Summers and the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party. Johnson also enacted the Voting Rights Act of 1965, which expanded on this voting rights that were in the Civil Rights Act of 1964. But with all these civil rights acts being passed, there's still some parties that would not have peaceful protests, like Malcolm X, the Nation of Islam, and the Black Panther Party. They had a more violent and aggressive approach to getting their rights, unlike the slower moving, peaceful protest by Martin Luther King Jr. Something else that started under Johnson was the Vietnam War, which Congress gave him a blank check to ramp up aggression against Vietnam, and it was another effort to contain communism.
What do I owe you? Nothing. It's for free. Free!
Next, this guy Richard became president. We saw a greater emphasis on the gay rights movement with the Stonewall Rebellion. There was also a rise of the counterculture movement with the Students for a Democratic Society and the hippies with their vans, peace signs, and acid. Nixon promised while campaigning his presidency to pull us out of Nam, but during his presidency ended up expanding into Cambodia. This marks a rising tension between the public and government about that war. There were also protests in places like Kent State University, which some of those ended up with casualties. The leaking of classified papers brought about the Pentagon Papers, which described and explained the deceptions of the Kennedy and Johnson administrations in the Gulf of Tonkin.
I found them. I found the papers.
Nixon was the first president to go to communist China and eat them good dumplings. The War Powers Act, which was passed by Congress, put the president's power in check. The Arab oil embargo brought an energy crisis to America. Nixon's downfall was the Watergate scandal, which said that Nixon knew about the bugs which were planted in the Democratic headquarters. He would later resign. People have to know whether or not their president's a crook. Oh, I'm not a crook. I've earned everything I've got.
Ford was the first unelected president. During his presidency, the U.S. finally pulled out of the Vietnam War. The Equals Right Amendment for women was introduced but never passed. Going back to the Supreme Court, Roe v. Wade allowed the legal rights for women to have abortions. We have an excerpt from that.
Roe alleged that she was unmarried and pregnant, that she wished to terminate her pregnancy by an abortion performed by a competent licensed physician under safe clinical conditions, that she was unable to get a legal abortion in Texas because her life did not appear to be threatened by the continuation of her pregnancy, and that she could not afford to travel to another jurisdiction in order to secure a legal abortion under safe conditions. She claimed that the Texas statutes were unconstitutionally vague and that they abridged her right of personal privacy protected by the First, Fourth, Fifth, Ninth, and 14th Amendments. By an amendment to her complaint, Roe purported to sue on behalf of herself and all other women similarly situated.
Another thing that was based on racial pretenses was the white flight, which, as more blacks were moving into big cities, whites would flee from the big cities and move into the suburbs. And not just because of this, but Ford would never be reelected. The last president of this time period was Jimmy. During his presidency, about 27% of the GNP depended on foreign trade, and the federal budget deficit was nearly $60 billion, almost as much as it cost to buy popcorn at the theaters. We'll be right back. Also, during Carter's presidency, there was a religious rebellion in Iran, and the ruler of Iran was kicked out, but Carter let him into the U.S., which soured relations between Iran's new government and the U.S. Also, there was new talks between the U.S. and the USSR of SALT II, which was just a limitation of nuclear arms. And the last big thing that happened in Carter's administration was the Iran hostage crisis, when the student rebellion stormed the embassy and kept the hostages there for over a year until Reagan's presidency. Thanks for watching. This is our first and last episode. Toodles.
This video is made possible by you, Ryan Simmons. He signed it to us. Thanks. And, of course, editor, Christian, producer, Adam, writers, Adam and Christian, the voice actors, Christian and Adam, and the actors, Adam and Christian, in association with FML, Federal Men's Ladybugs.
There are also new talks of SALT II, which was a new talk, just like SALT I, but in a new form of SALT II.
The leaking of classified papers brought about the Pentagon Papers, which were the deceptions of Kennedy and Johnson administrations in the Gulf of Tonkin. That sentence did not go right.
Also during, what is this, Ford? Sorry.
Carter.
This is Carter, yeah, this is Carter.